All right, and speaking of those anti-Trump protests, what we're looking at now is whether or not Africa's interests are still being prioritized as a result of his election. And joining us now to help us understand this situation or what the possible impacts or implications could be from Donald Trump's presidency, we're joined by Mark Bulland, who is an economist, Africa and Middle East at Bloomberg. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you. What are the risks that we're looking at when it comes to Donald Trump's election?
I mean, it's still very early days. Trump is, putting together his administration. It's still, we don't know who's going to be in key positions in the state. People are talking about Rudy Giuliani, the former the former New York governor. But I put out a piece saying that I think there are reasons for Africa not to worry too much about Trump becoming president and his administration.
Well, there might not be so many strong reasons to worry, but the fact that he's showing a lot of uncertainty on what exactly his policies are going to be about, shouldn't that be a reason for African economies to worry, considering the fact that we always don't seem to have a plan for the future?
Yes, I think that's the biggest thing now for is just the uncertainty, what he's going to do. And also, he came out with quite some radical policies, as you mentioned, during the campaign, but now he's kind of been dialing back on that in his acceptance speech, talking about more issues that are less controversial, about boosting infrastructure spending, which people across the aisle, also Democrats, have been in favor of. So maybe that's the more likely way he's going to go. And other practices, he's talked about tariffs to China, against China, which would be harmful for China, also US, the global economy as a whole. May hasn't talked very much about that, so maybe there's less concern about that, at least in the near term.
All right, so he has portrayed a sort of protectionist attitude when it comes to his presidency. And then when you look at the plans he is having, he's looking at increasing manufacturing in the United States. And that means it's going to have to go down for China. Do you see any impact that this is likely to have on the African continent as a result?
Yes, firstly, I think it will be difficult to deliver on these things. Tariffs, the most immediate impact is pushing up prices. A lot of these Trump voters shop from places like Walmart to have very low prices thanks to a lot of the goods are actually manufactured in China. So, the initial impact of a tariff would be to push up the prices of these goods, push up inflation, which would hurt these groups, these sort of disenfranchised group. They've already done pretty badly. They've seen their incomes being eroded over the past few decades as, manufacturing has been relocated to China and other locations. So
right.
That would be the most immediate impact. With inflation will go up and these people would have even less to spend. And then maybe in the future, they will lead to more jobs in manufacturing in the US, but most likely that would be beyond at least Donald Trump's first term, and it's still unclear if he will get a second term. So I think he will be wary of these considerations.
So if we're looking at these risks, we're only looking at them for, say, the next 4 years and not exactly 8 years.
I think that's what Trump, like any other elected politician, is going to look at a next election and focus on things he can deliver improvements that will over the next few years, rather than the longer term when someone else will be in office and reap benefit of that. So that's why I think Trump will find it quite hard to deliver on some of these things he's talked about in trade. So that's one reason maybe to be less worried about that.
All right. I would now like to pick your brain when it comes to African countries and dependence on foreign aid. I'm sure you have done quite a bit of writing about Africa's dependency on aid as well.
Yeah.
But do you think we are at a time where we should now start strategizing on what other options we can use, to raise revenue or to raise funds without necessarily waiting on the United Kingdom or the United States to, donate money to our countries?
Yes, I think it is a good time to do that. When it comes to foreign aid, I think Brexit will have a bigger impact than USAID. USAID is, is the biggest bilateral donor, but if you add up the EU countries together and what's donated through the EU institutions, that's more than 2 times the size of the US aid. And UK has been a very important partner driving UK aid and pushing forward to things. So, and I mean, that's one of the things that the Brexiteers have been talking about. You have Priti Patel as the new development minister that has previously, although this was a few years ago, talked, saying that foreign aid should be banned altogether, and I think this is a worrying development. I mean, there are definitely negative examples of foreign aid being, misused or just wasted, but you have other things like, infant mortality, the drop in infant mortality, which is partly due to foreign aid within the healthcare sector. But
right. Well, there's some analysts who actually say that there's not really much that Africa is going to lose, even if the United Kingdom today said, they're going to cut aid to the African continent, or the United States is going to cut aid to the African continent, precisely because some of Africa's top donors, for a country like Kenya, for instance, we've got China, we've got Japan, we've got Germany, and then we have the United Kingdom coming in 4th or 5th place, and then the United States probably in about, well, they say they give us about $500 million every year. So you can see that maybe, they're not really a priority amongst the countries that give the most aid to a country like Kenya. And so they're saying, despite the fact that they've threatened to cut aid, there's not much that Kenya is going to lose as a result of Brexit or as a result of Donald Trump's presidency. Would you agree with that?
I think there are definitely still things to lose. Maybe it's more technical assistance, the influence, the political influence that the UK has within the EU. Of course, US is an important security partner, but I mean, this is something that Trump needs to take into account, is that if they pare back their support for China, that will leave the field, if they pare back their support for Africa, that will leave the field open for China, which has already sort of increased its influence within Africa. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Uhuru Kenyatta, when he became president, the first places he visited outside of the continent was Moscow and Beijing, rather than London or Washington. So I mean, that's something I think that the Trump administration will take into account, that aid to Africa and also trade concessions within the African Growth and Opportunities Act don't actually cost them very much, both in terms of actual dollars and also in jobs, because they're not in areas where Kenya and other countries are competing directly with the US. And if you pare it back, you'll essentially leave the door open for China to expand its influence in the region.
All right. So, we've talked a lot about how much we have to lose as a result of Donald Trump's presidency. But this is my last question to you. What does the United States have to lose should they cut aid or cut relations with African countries?
Of course, I mean, Africa is, the growing region, one of the fastest growing regions. You have, Ford, I think, announced an investment. It's a continent where a lot of American companies want to get a foothold, because they know that's where the growth is going to be. And of course, if the government isn't, pulling the strings, contributing to this, you're going to leave the field open for Airbus, European companies, Chinese companies that are still prioritizing, where the governments are still prioritizing their relations to Africa. So that's, I think, a reason for that. I think the Trump administration will think twice before they cut US aid and US trade concessions to Africa.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. We do appreciate the time taken to talk to us. Mark Bolland is an economist, Africa and the Middle East at Bloomberg.